little alleyway. So it was getting quite dangerous to the point that it's going to get to winter and it's going to start like leaking water on people's heads and people are going to complain and, you know, they didn't want to get in trouble. So I had to remove this ivy. And as I was removing it, God spoke to me in the moment of kind of looking at all the different branches of the ivy. I don't know if people are familiar, but it grows like really interlinked. So there'll be the big strong bits that grow up that are the kind of from the root, and then there's all these little branches that come off, and then each little branch mixes in with another branch that comes off from another one of the roots, and then each one of those little branches has got tiny little, like, they look almost like centipede legs, like all like that then attach onto whatever they're growing against. So like God spoke to me about this ivy, and at the time I was dealing with like a few different things and I was getting frustrated and I was feeling like I wanted to move into better spiritual maturity, but I felt a bit stuck. It felt like every time I was moving forward, something was blocking me, or it felt like I was getting knocked back, or I was constantly in this battle of trying to move and become a bit more spiritually mature. And with this ivy, God kind of showed me that battle was a bit like battling that ivy. It you know, it was about that in your life, it's not that you've just got one issue or something that, you know, you can just deal with and then you've like dealt with it. Oh, I'm spiritually mature now. That's great. Yeah, like life's wonderful. It's so many little branches that are so interwoven and like interlinked, and that each one of those areas that we let into our life of like something that, you know, a little lie here that doesn't hurt anyone, or a little loss of temper here that doesn't hurt anyone, you know, or a little bit of unforgiveness here, just don't like that person, like just can't like them, won't like them, don't like them. You know, all those little branches that on the surface of it, we say, oh, that's our humanness, that's how we are. They weave together and they make this really strong structure, you know, that chokes us really. That it's worldly, it's not of God, it's sin, it's, you know, those things that lock us down. And so I felt God was saying to me that when I'm getting frustrated about trying to break through, it's because I'm thinking that I'm going to chop that big ivy root and the whole ivy structure is going to come down. But even if I chop that ivy root, it's been growing so long, it's so interwoven, all those little things are around it, that actually I have to chop each one of those. And each one of those feels like I haven't achieved anything. But then when I step back and I look at it, what I've exposed is the big chunky thing that was holding all of those little things together. The big chunky thing that I couldn't get at because all those little things were covered on top of it, not allowing me to break through to that, you know, that root. And then when you get there, anyone who's removed ivy, it's not a one-person job. You need some support. You need people around you to then deal with some of those issues, because some of those issues are quite heavy. That, you know, the ivy on top of the fence was literally the size of me. Like, couldn't get it down on my own. Anyway, so that was the situation that I felt kind of God spoke to me through, and I felt led to share this evening with you guys, because I think God's heart really is for us to move forward. It's not for us to remain trapped. It's, you know, we have freedom through Christ, like God gave us that, and it's not for us to then tie ourselves up with other things that, you know, religious things about what we think a Christian should be or how we think a Christian should act, all those sorts of things. It's to be filled with the Holy Spirit and actually to behave as God is showing us through Jesus, how God is like given us instruction through the Bible, to behave like that. You know, and it's a journey. So, yeah, I think what I was sharing about, it requires endurance. It's not about you can just chop the ivy down in an hour. Like, it takes, you know, if it's been growing a long time, which lots of these things have in our lives, you know, they've been a childhood experience that we've moved on from, but actually the effects of it and all the, you know, something linked to that, some anger or some feeling towards that hasn't. Or it could be something that happened last week that, you know, brushed over us, but actually it brings us back to that place that same thing, that same root cause, or that same issue that we've, had in our lives, that we're left with that structure and we need to remove it. And that's a journey. So that takes time and that takes energy. And sometimes there's seasons of rest where we can rest back and we can, live in God's grace and God's mercy. And there's other times where God calls us to be pruned and calls us to be disciplined and calls us actually to chop some of those branches and to work on those things that are holding us, and tying us down and restricting us from moving forward. So Hebrews 12, talks about the running the race, the endurance of that, finishing your race. And Galatians 5 talks about standing in the freedom of Christ, that, that God's given you, not to be entangled in new bondage, but using that liberty not for your fleshly lusts and the things that you want, but for your godly love to serve one another and to look after each other. And it's really interesting because that's what I felt God wanted me to speak about. And then I was brought back to John 15, which talks about the vine. And Jesus says, I am the vine and you are the branches. And it made like a really nice parallel for me. It's just how my brain works. Hopefully you'll understand what I'm trying to say. But that actually, when we replace that worldly ivy with the godly vine and that spiritual vine, it's a similar structure, that God is that vine and we're the branches. And together, in the community that God's brought us together in, we can make a really strong structure. We can, hold each other up. We support each other if we all live in that root and in that strength of God being the vine and the thing that unites us together. So I just really felt that both for me and for the church, for us to rely on the Holy Spirit to show us those areas that, the next small branch that we need to chop, the next area that we need to move us into spiritual maturity and more spiritual wisdom. Because Paul says, it's a daily dying to self, isn't it? It's a constant task. It's not that you can just chop down the ivy and then just leave it. Like, it will grow back and it will grow bigger, better, stronger, and it will keep growing back. So it's a daily thing that we're going to have to do, and that's what that maturity is. It's about, that constant, the same way that we eat our daily food, that constant daily, living in the spirit and not in the flesh. And I was just thinking about a few things that, in the world's ivy, we're told that God's forgotten, or that God doesn't remember that thing, or God doesn't care about that thing. But when we put that into, the Jesus's vine, then actually it's, I'm teaching you patience. I haven't forgotten. I know the promises and the plans I have for you, and I'm teaching you patience. When the world's saying, God's abandoned you, where's God? Look at how you're suffering. Look at what you're going through. Actually, on Jesus's vine, that's saying, I never said there wasn't going to be suffering, but I didn't say I would ever leave you in it. I'm there with you. I'm comforting you, and I'm going to use this to turn around for my good. I'm going to use this to grow, to teach you, to grow you. What on the world's branch says that you need to earn trust. You need to, show me respect and I'll respect you. In God's vine, that's trust without borders. That's God's security and God's safety that he's given us. And then, but on the flip side, we have to be careful because we're so human in it that we don't entangle ourselves in new bondage. And what we think is, when we behave with righteous anger, that doesn't become, in God's vine, that righteous anger doesn't become worldly temper and worldly violence or anything like that. That the striving for that growth and for that spiritual maturity in God's kingdom doesn't become in the world a need for perfection and a need for control and a need to, make everything around you work out absolutely perfectly for what your plan is and what you've got. So that's what I felt God wanted to bring tonight, and I just pray that whatever everyone's going through, however we're all kind of feeling, whatever the day-to-day brings, that God's just calling us to lean into his, his arms and his structure and his, truth and his word that actually is our strength and will build us up and will make us mature, and through that we can move from, what we see at face value of our faith to what is actually a real relationship with God that takes us through those times of suffering, takes us through those things that happen around us, and allows us to break free from the stuff that traps us in the world, the sin or the experiences of our life and things like that, that we can break free from that and we can move forward in the Holy Spirit. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for listening.